Welcome to Natural Born Talents. Today's subject is the Ikido, Succubus, and Incubus, and how these three are somewhat related in one way or another, and how it's related to sleep paralysis, or Kanashibari in Japanese. Now, I've said in many videos before, there are all kinds of beings on this planet, as well as strengths of soul. You have very, very weak baby souls, all the way up to very strong old souls. It is usually one of the weaker souls that succumb to the practice of being an Ikido, Succubus, or Incubus. So let's get into the details of what the difference of each one is. The Ikido itself is not a demon, but a human being practiced demonic possession. The weaker souls usually do this because there's someone near them that they envy. The Ikido can be a man or a woman. And what they do is they basically possess another human being to try to be them because they find themselves lacking. They want their energy, they want their abilities, whatever aspect they find appealing. A simple example of this would be somebody who is a photographer, is a kind of a cool person, and someone within the family or that individual's friends envies their ability to be a good photographer, and they want that ability or that freedom, so they suddenly become photographers themselves. Then the Ikido will try to cut down the real photographer or compete with them and try to prove to themselves that they're the better photographer. I've often seen this done in cults where one person who's supposed to be very spiritual will be cut down by someone else in the group who thinks that they are more spiritual, and they try to be the leader of the cult, and eventually will try to get the first leader to make a mistake or to go too far or something in order for them to take their place. Seen this done all too often, especially in politics. Now, what does that have to do with the succubus and the incubus? The succubus and the incubus do the same thing, but through the sexual act. They will possess another person for their sexual energy. A woman who is envious of another individual's sexual energy, for example, may subconsciously or consciously summon a succubus, usually through some deal with the devil or other fallen angel, but that's not necessary. Now, if you don't believe in the devil or anything like that, you could look at this from a psychological point of view and simply watch the behavior of the individual who is attacking you. The incubus, for all intents and purposes, is really pretty much the same thing, except it's male. It's a male entity that usually attacks other female, basically rapes them. In fact, many rape cases are probably connected to the incubus, but I don't have any solid proof of that. It's just the psychological behavior that goes through rape, draining someone of their energy after such an experience and keeping the victim locked into their world, into their psyche, with the vulgar, horrifying trauma that they created. A common scenario I have seen has been where a man is actually very sexually decadent but wants to hide it. So often what they do is they join a religious organization, usually something Christian, in order to try to behave like a moralist to hide their actual sexual deviance. And then they'll take on the incubus demon, and in the middle of the night will go rape their own daughter or a relative or even a neighbor in spiritual form. And this is where sleep paralysis or Kanashibari is often, but not always, caused from. An old friend of mine once had this very experience way back when I was in high school. She and her sister were both being physically and spiritually raped by their father, who was an incubus. He was a hardcore moralist, highly intelligent and respected scientist, but would physically rape their daughters. And then after he couldn't do that physically, these girls were waking up in the middle of the night, couldn't move, could see the demon raping them, could do nothing about it, knew it was their father. But of course the psychiatrist would say, oh, that's just the nightmare from the trauma that you have recurring, when the girls knew perfectly well what it was. And of course the man was hiding under the umbrella of Christianity, pretending to be a moralistic goody two-shoe and preaching the Bible and showing off his intellect in the science community. Later, word got out of his sexual deviance, and he was pretty much shunned by about everyone in the neighborhood. But since there was no evidence and the daughters didn't want to push charges, he still remains this disgusting old man in his Keep Up with the Joneses house. Now, the succubus works similarly, but is female, and therefore what they will do is try to, in physical form, entice a man usually, but sometimes a woman, into a sexual act. And though the sexual act is very physical and very lusty and sometimes very skilled in lovemaking, the victim is actually being raped, because after the sexual act they go home exhausted, tired, drained, not fulfilled. Like I explained in the other videos, where if you have an Aquarian come make love to you, for example, you'll be bouncing off the wall for weeks with a smile on your face. But the succubus, you will feel drained, depressed, angered, hostile, and in extreme cases you become suicidal. The degree of depression can vary due to many environmental backgrounds, friend support, family support, or the lack of, etc., etc. Now, the succubus may become a stalker. If the victim realizes that they're being played and they want out of the relationship, the succubus in human form may start exhibiting very strange behavior, showing up at your workplace demanding attention, calling you up 24/7 on the phone, or in these days online or whatever, rivaling anyone else that you want to have a relationship with. Succubus are very jealous of their source of energy, so they may attack anyone they feel is supporting the victim. If the victim manages to keep physical distance between the succubus and themselves, they may discover that during their sleep time, the succubus showing up either in their dreams or in spiritual form, again with the Kanashibari or sleep paralysis taking place. The resistance is difficult because the sexual pleasure is always a lot of fun, but the draining and the headache and the depression and all the malaise that come afterwards is of course not worth it. You're messing with a demon and you need to get rid of it. Now, as I said in the past, getting rid of demons is really hard, as well as the Ikido. You really have to either get off the pattern that they know. In other words, if you go to work in the same car or the same bus route on a daily basis, they know your soul. They can smell it, they can feel it, and they can haunt you at pretty much any point that you go to if the pattern is consistent. Now, sometimes if you simply change your routine, you can shake one of these off, but that's rare. More likely than not, you're going to have to move away from the place that you live, a different apartment, extreme cases, a different house, a different state, a different country. The greatest danger of the succubus and the incubus is depression, which could lead to suicidal thoughts. Usually the host of these encounters do not get corrupted and become succubus or incubus themselves unless they will it. It does happen, but more often than not they will get drained too much and succumb to some disease or some disorder. Their spiritual strength has been drained. But on the other hand, it does happen. Occasionally when you see the town whore or the town playboy, they are likely connected to that part of the world and can't move past getting sexual gratification for the sake of their ego, for their source of energy, and the like. There is much more I can go on about the psychological makeup of the incubus or the succubus. Basically, however, I'll give you another example of one that I was dealing with here in Tokyo. A woman who wanted to be famous, a famous artist, realized she didn't have what it takes to be really good, to break it into the mainstream part of the matrix, so to speak. So what she did is she sold her soul out, and even some of the other people around her, not just me, could sense this really dark entity around her. And of course this was the succubus. And she basically started to attack all the boys who were struggling to be artists themselves, and some of them were good. But most of them were naive and didn't realize that her sexual advances were really to pull them into her little trap. Now, I won't go into details, but the various sexual acts that she played with these boys, all at the same time in some cases, was not what we would call Aquarian or Olympian. It was definitely more on the demonic side. However, the boys, not realizing that they were getting a lot of fun, but they were actually sacrificing a lot of their talent, their energy, and maybe even their soul in this game. And to this day, I have not seen any of these people being able to move away from her, even though they have moved out of the town where this all had started. And the reason for this is because the boys still are in contact via online social media. And this is why a lot of the problems with social media I see in the world today, causing these people who are vicious narcissists, succuba, incubus, or whatever, tapping in the social media in order to invade someone's life. So to get rid of one of these negative entities, you have to be very, very diligent about cutting off all connections, the source of the problem. Now, I'd like to point out at the end of this video, there are some people who are here to bring very loving and very nurturing sexual acts, no matter what form they take. And this is to point out that how do you feel after the sex act? Do you feel drained? Do you feel loved? Do you feel renewed? Do you feel satisfied? Do you feel unsatisfied? Go through your psyche after you make love with somebody and see what comes up into your mind, and maybe you can figure out that maybe that person is just spiritually, sexually weak. Maybe that person is a succubus or incubus. Maybe that person is an Olympian, an Aquarian. It really will depend on how much lust is involved versus how much love is involved, usually in the matrix. Not always the case. There are exceptions, but we can get to that in another video. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks again for watching. I hope to get out and do some more paranormal investigations soon. Any support would be greatly appreciated. Details listed below. And again, feel free to ask any questions or leave any comments in the comments section below.